It's 1 o'clock, it's Thursday, and you're here at the Birmingham Museum for our regular Thursday program on Facebook Live, where we talk about issues of local history and some interesting stories of Birmingham. And I'm Leslie Pilak, I'm the museum director, and with me is Donna Cassicelli.
Hello.
Who works here at the museum with us, and we will be talking today about Jacobson's department store of Birmingham. For a couple of reasons, we wanted to talk about Jacobson's today. One is because today, actually began yesterday, the Birmingham Shopping District is has a special pandemic version of their regular Day on the Town. Sorry, it eluded me. This year they're calling it Back to Birmingham. So you can come and shop in Birmingham with a lot of the great sales and prices that the Day on the Town normally has. But you have 7 days to do it. So yesterday was day 1, so today's day 2. So that's part of the theme of retail and great shopping experiences in Birmingham. But Jacobson's is a very special story, and Jacobson's in Birmingham in particular. So how we are going to talk about this today, behind me is our current exhibit on Jacobson's, which is part of our suffrage exhibit and the Women of Birmingham, because Jacobson's had a huge impact on women in Birmingham, both the people who work there as well as the community. We'll mention that in a moment. But secondly, because at the museum level here, we don't all know everything about everything. In fact, we specialize quite a bit in different areas of local history. And today, it's Donna Cassicelli who is our Jacobson's expert. How I would like to go about this is to ask Donna to elaborate on some things about Jacobson's for your benefit. Those of you who might have some questions, feel free to post them because they can be read and passed on to us during the program. So, Donna, why did Jacobson's come to Birmingham, and how did they change Birmingham when they got here?
Well, Nathan Rosenfeld wanted to expand the Jacobson's line. It originally started in like the 1850s in Reed City, moved to Jackson, and they started adding different stores like in Grosse Pointe. They were definitely going for more higher end communities at the time, and Birmingham fit the ticket. They decided to actually not go into downtown Birmingham as they knew it back then. They actually picked a spot north of the town on Maple Road. It was the old Shell station, which actually was John Allen Bigelow's house. And they tore that down and built the first Jacobson's here in Birmingham, knowing full well that, yes, people were going to have to walk. They knew full well that it was not in the center of town, but they also trusted that women and gentlemen would come this far out to help instigate that flow. They actually are responsible for putting in the parking structures that we know in Birmingham today. They would be responsible for building those parking structures so that people could have an easy access to Jacobson's.
And in fact, isn't the North Old Woodward parking structure specifically was built for that Jacobson's expansion up there?
Yes, it was. We have a lot of newspaper articles with Nathan Rosenfeld working with the city of Birmingham. So a lot of the finances came from Jacobson's, along with from the taxpayers who were going to benefit from that parking structure.
And people who park in Birmingham now, who go into the North Old Woodward parking structure, even though it's had some facelifts here and there, are going into that original structure. It has its own separate history, which we won't get into at this moment, but trust me, it does. So back to Jacobson's though. Behind you, we have some things on display here. We also have some things in the cases behind me. What would you, if you were to talk to someone who had never been to Jacobson's and just didn't understand why Birmingham and Jacobson's were such a great fit, what would you want to say to them?
Jacobson's was not your typical department store. It was not impersonal. As a matter of fact, it was the opposite. It was very personal. When you shopped at Jacobson's, you had a salesperson. This person usually knew you by your first name, and it was a woman. Jacobson's would be one of the primary employers of women in Birmingham, and it would be one of the first places that offered upward mobility so that women could become managers. So that was a nice little facet. But these women would get to know who was coming in, and what was great about Jacobson's is they actually offered stationery to the salespeople so that they could write letters to their clients, letting them know if new products came in, or say you were having a little bit of hard luck, you quite couldn't spend what you wanted to, but you still needed clothes for your family. Saleswomen would write letters and saying, well, you know, children's outfits for school are coming on sale. You might want to check that out this week. So they were very involved, but they hired right from the community for the community to serve the members. So these people were friends. They helped each other out. It was a lot more than just walking into the mall today, going into Sears or JCPenney's or Macy's and shopping. It wasn't the same. It was going to a friend and saying, what do you recommend?
So the relationships mattered a lot. And didn't people work at Jacobson's for sometimes like 20 and 30 years?
Yes, Jacobson's actually hired married women.
Wow. What a breakthrough.
I know, when Jacobson's first came to Birmingham in the 1950s, when you got married, you quit your job. Mm-hmm. When you had a child, you quit your job. You didn't work, you stayed at home. But I think Jacobson's realized that wasn't always possible. And so women could continue working even if they were married. So yeah, people could stay for a very long time. And when you talk to some of the people who worked at Jacobson's over the decades, they talk about how it was a family, it wasn't a job. It was, you know, you enjoyed going to work, you enjoyed working with your customers, you enjoyed working with your managers because everybody cared.
And am I remembering correctly that the Jacobson's staff were given a lot of latitude to handle things within the store as was going to be best for their clientele in this situation?
Yes, and what's interesting is a lot of the staff still have Facebook pages that they're private pages, but I have been graced with some of the conversations by some of the old staff that have been staff since the 50s and 60s and 70s, and they're still talking to each other, they're still congregating, they're still family, they still have picnics, they still gather. So even though Jacobson's closed and went bankrupt in 2002, these people are still involved in each other's lives. It wasn't just a job.
And I think it's also important to point out that the Jacobsons story, at least in Birmingham, like any story, you know, it follows an arc. So there was the early days, and then there was the heyday of Jacobsons here in Birmingham, and how, you know, important it was in everyday life and business, you know, development in Birmingham and the attraction of other retail outlets, etc. But then there was a decline, and those factors that played into the decline had to do with things that were outside the immediate environment of Birmingham. They were economic changes in the U.S., the way people shopped, etc. So I don't think that Jacobsons did anything, you know, wrong, or that there was any reason internally that they couldn't make it. I think it was changes in society that led to a decline of that kind of model.
When the economy started to fall in the 1990s, Jacobson's did panic a little bit. They fired Nathan Rosenfeld's son from the board of directors, and they hired on a few people coming from other corporate centers. And their idea was drop prices, buy cheap. And so the quality in Jacobson's by the end of the 90s had gone down.
So I stand corrected. They actually did make some internal decisions that helped bring down.
But they did it because of what was happening at the economy. They couldn't really quite afford to continue buying the quality material. But this was happening at a lot of department stores. It just, it was unsustainable. And they either were going to close early or they were going to try and grasp for that last straw.
Okay.
So they tried to grasp for that last straw. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The quality was just too, it became too much like every other department store.
So let's go back then a couple decades to that period when Jacobson's was, the place to shop in Birmingham. And some of the things people remember about what was so special about Jacobson's there. For one thing, my impression certainly is that Jacobson's was all about being classy, but not about being elitist. So,
right. So Jacobson's could be expensive, not going to lie, but it also offered a lot of different ways of acquiring the highest fashion of the day. Jacobson's actually was split inside of its own self into like the Miss J shop, the women's shop, the children's shop, the Mr. J shop, which was for the young men, and then they had another shop just for art. So they broke it up a little bit. So if you were a young woman heading off to college and you wanted some good but not highly expensive, you went to the Miss J shop. They carried good quality, but definitely middle-priced clothing that you could afford going off to college. If you wanted that beautiful, I can't remember his name, Klein. Calvin Klein. If you wanted a gorgeous Calvin Klein, but you couldn't afford the original Calvin Klein, you could go over to the fabric section of Jacobson's. They actually had a place where you could buy the patterns of the clothes that they sold. And then they had high quality wools and silks and other kinds of fabrics that you could buy by the yard. So you could actually pick your own colors too and make your own outfit, and you'd have a Calvin Klein, just not made in the Calvin Klein shop. They did this with a lot of the different designers where you could buy that pattern. So yeah, say you were, working class, or a woman who was just getting into the workforce and you could not buy a suit, but you needed a suit to work, you could just go into Jacobson's. They would help you pick out the correct pattern, the correct size. Just because you couldn't afford the original Calvin Klein, they would still measure you, fit you, get you ready, and say this is what you need, and send you home for you to work on it yourself.
Let's talk about some of the things that are in this room. You bring up suits. So there's a story to the suit that's displayed behind you.
So what was really exciting about doing the Jacobsons, when I started the Jacobsons, is we really didn't have much Jacobson stuff in the museum. We had a hat or two, and that's about it. But when we reached out to the Birmingham community, oh my goodness, everybody was so excited to just, here, take this, hey, I have this in my closet, I have that in my closet. And this suit here actually comes from a woman who went to university to become a lawyer and ended up getting a position in Australia as a barrister. And she would come back every year to Birmingham specifically to shop at Jacobson's and get her clothing to take back to Australia because it was quality clothing. And so she would pack her trunk full of Jacobson's. When she found out that we were trying to acquire different items, she donated quite a bit: shoes, hats, pearls, suits. It was the same with this gorgeous wedding dress. We gave a talk at the Baldwin Library, and the woman 70, and it was made at Jacobson's, completely hand sewn, hand beaded, and we were like, yes, we'll take it.
And it is beautiful. It's beautiful. It was also displayed at the Bloomfield Township Library about
In January.
the end of last year and the first of this year for just to help show it to another part of our audience. Our audience has broadened, and it's been very cool that with all the collection items coming to the museum from Jacobson's, we're actually learning more about Jacobson's, but also becoming, you're certainly a Jacobson's expert right now, and so those people who have Jacobson's questions, really, this is the person to direct them to. If she doesn't know, she knows how to find out.
And again, we'll have to throw it down in the comments, but that Jacobson speech from the Baldwin Library is on video, so that can be viewed.
Now, there's another item in our collection, which is in the case behind me, and it's the hat. Can you tell the story about the hat?
The hat is on loan by another woman who just happened to come to the speech and was very excited and said that she had the hat and the hat box and wanted to loan it to us. So we gladly accepted that.
Okay, so that's the Adolfo.
Yes. So the
Adolfo's
other
here.
Adolfo. So we do have another Adolfo hat. It was on display at the Baldwin Library talk, and it was on display at the Bloomfield Township Library. It is not on display right now, just because we went into the pandemic as I was switching out hats and trying to do everything, and we had to switch modes, so it didn't come out yet, but we'll definitely.
So we don't have to show, but the
Right.
story is great, so maybe you can.
So it is an exact hat that Princess Diana wore around the 1990s, right before her divorce, and Jacobson's and several other stores were selling this hat, and Princess Diana probably bought it at Harrods because it was Adolfo II was sold at Harrods and in New York City, and of course here in Birmingham, because if Princess Diana wears it, well, Birmingham's gonna have to sell it. But yes, it's not on display right now. I'm sorry.
So I didn't mean to put you, but you did a great job describing it. There's another aspect of Birmingham's Jacobson's that I know you wanted to touch on, and that has to do with its art and decor role.
So Jacobson's was in a lot of different cities here in Michigan. Jackson and Ann Arbor and Grosse Pointe, and I think there was one up in Bay City. But Birmingham quickly became the flagship. One of the biggest reasons is that they could draw the named designers, like Calvin Klein. He actually came to Birmingham and did a show. Stephen Barrows came and did a show. I mean, there were so many designers that came and did shows. But there was one thing that Birmingham offered that I don't think any other Jacobson's was able to offer, and that was the fine art. And one of the big things is every single year, for several years in a row, they held a Picasso show, where you could not only just come and see Picassos, you could buy Picassos. And I always found it interesting, but in one of the newspaper articles, when it's describing, it gave a list of the artwork that was being sold on that day in Jacobson's, and we have a little display with a lot of the artwork that was actually sold that year in Jacobson's. But one of my favorite pieces is the Tarot. It is the bronze bull. What I love about it is it was only 2.5 inches high, and I made a little cutout so everybody could pull it off the wall and hold it. This was the height of the little bronze statue, and in the 1960s it sold for $4,200 at Birmingham. So yes, you could buy a $4,000 Picasso, or you could go into the needlepoint section and buy a $3 needlepoint for your wall. That was the great thing about Jacobson's, though. It catered to every pocketbook, and on top of that, they treated every pocketbook the same. So whether you were buying that $3 needlepoint kit that you were going to put together at home, you were still treated with the same courtesy and respect and kindness that you were if you were buying your $4,000 2.5-inch roll.
There was room for every kind of shopper there. In fact, from stories that I've heard, people would often go to Jacobson's as an outing, even if they weren't intending to purchase anything, just to see what are the new lines coming out of New York, or what could we plan for our next party, because they would have services where they would help you plan a party, and they would do every aspect of it with you so that you would have the perfect party. Or Christmas time, when Jacobson's pulled off all the stops, and you could take your children and your entire family and go in and just be treated to a most wonderful Christmas themed experience. The toy department, all of those things became like a part of Birmingham life. If you were going to meet with a friend and go to the restaurant, I think my understanding is that you could get a very nice lunch there in the restaurant inside Jacobson's, in that wonderful environment for really not very much money. And so it's like it was home away from home in some regards for people, and they always felt comfortable going.
Yes. Jacobson's had their own menu too. I know my mother-in-law was a huge Jacobson's shopper, and the quiche Lorraine, the chief soup. Actually, when we had this speech at the Baldwin Library, I was passing out recipe cards to all of the wonderful dishes that were exclusive to Jacobson's, and people still want those recipes. Yeah.
So we were going to have to wind down this program, but if you have questions about Jacobson's, or you want to get hold of those recipes, you can contact Donna Casaselli. Give them your phone number and your email.
My phone number is 248-530-1683, and my email is dcasaselli, CASACELI, at bhamgov.org. Hopefully we can put that on the comments, because that's a crazy last name. I'm very into it.
You're not responsible.
I'm not responsible for the content of that email address.
So thanks for joining us for a little bit of discussion about Jacobson's, Birmingham history, shopping, and all the fun stuff that goes with that. And next week, our theme is another iconic figure in Birmingham, and an iconic place too, and that is Harris Marcus. And of course, it's not possible to talk about Harris Marcus of Birmingham without talking about his restaurants, in particular the Marcus Red Fox, which, if you think you've heard of it before and you think it's connected with the story of Jimmy Hoffa, you're right. So I encourage you to tune in next week when Caitlin and Donna talk more about Harris Marcus, his incredible background in military service, and his restaurants.